My wedding was ruined by bad luck, but it turns out the real reason was my mother-in-law. Patricia Montgomery had always been the kind of woman who believed her opinions carried more weight than anyone else's, especially when it came to matters involving her only son, Michael. She was elegant, well-connected in our small Georgia town, and accustomed to having her preferences respected and implemented by the people around her. Patricia had planned elaborate events for decades through her involvement in the country club, charity organizations, and social committees that shaped the cultural life of our community. When Michael and I got engaged after dating for 3 years, Patricia immediately began expressing strong opinions about how our wedding should be planned and executed. She had a mental checklist of vendors, venues, and traditions that she considered essential for any wedding involving her family. Patricia's expectations weren't suggestions or gentle recommendations. They were presented as requirements that any reasonable bride would naturally want to fulfill. Of course you'll want to use the country club for your reception, she announced during our first wedding planning discussion. It's where all the Montgomery family celebrations have been held for generations. We were actually thinking about having the reception at the historic mansion downtown, I said carefully. It has such beautiful gardens and architecture. Patricia's expression shifted to one of polite disapproval. The historic mansion is lovely, dear, but it lacks the prestige and proper facilities that your wedding deserves. We really love the character and charm of the mansion setting. Character is wonderful, but practicality matters more for events of this importance. Patricia had similar strong opinions about every aspect of our wedding planning. She insisted we should use her preferred caterer, florist, and band. She had specific ideas about appropriate color schemes, acceptable invitation styles, and suitable menu options. Most importantly, she had very definite feelings about which photographer should capture our wedding day. Robert Grant is the only photographer worth considering, she told me during one of our planning sessions. He's photographed every significant social event in this town for the past 20 years. I've looked at Robert's portfolio, and his style feels a bit formal and traditional for what Michael and I have in mind. Formal and traditional are exactly what wedding photography should be. You want timeless elegance, not trendy artistic shots that will look dated in 5 years. We found a photographer named David Rivera, whose work we really love. His style is more natural and candid. Patricia's disapproval was immediate and obvious. I've never heard of this David Rivera person. Where is he from? He's based about an hour north of here, but he's willing to travel for our wedding. Why would you hire someone from out of town when we have perfectly qualified photographers right here? Because we love his artistic vision and the way he captures authentic emotions during ceremonies. Robert Grant has been capturing authentic emotions at weddings since before you were born. This conversation, like many others about our wedding plans, ended without resolution. Patricia clearly expected me to defer to her superior knowledge and experience. I politely listened to her recommendations, but ultimately made decisions based on what Michael and I actually wanted for our celebration. Michael was caught in the middle of these planning discussions, loving both his mother and his fiancée, but struggling to navigate the tension between us. Mom just wants our wedding to be perfect, he would say when I expressed frustration about Patricia's pushiness. She has a lot of experience with event planning, and she knows what works well in this community. But it's our wedding, not hers. Shouldn't we get to choose vendors and styles that reflect our tastes? Of course, but maybe we could consider some of her suggestions. She really does know the best people in town. I don't doubt her connections, but I want our wedding to feel like us, not like what she thinks we should want. Can't we find some middle ground that makes everyone happy? Michael's desire to keep peace between his mother and me was understandable, but it meant that most of our wedding decisions became negotiations between Patricia's preferences and our original vision. We compromised on several issues to maintain family harmony. We chose Patricia's preferred caterer after tasting their food and finding it acceptable. We selected flowers from her recommended florist because their work was beautiful, even if it wasn't our original style preference. We even agreed to hold our ceremony at the country club, though we kept the historic mansion for our reception venue. But on the photographer issue, I held firm. David Rivera's portfolio showed exactly the kind of wedding photography Michael and I wanted. Natural, artistic, focused on genuine moments rather than stiff posed portraits. His style captured the joy and emotion of wedding celebrations in a way that felt authentic and beautiful. Robert Grant's work was technically proficient but formal and dated, filled with traditional poses that felt more like corporate headshots than celebration photography. I understand that Patricia has strong feelings about the photographer, I told Michael after another tense discussion about our choice. But this is one area where I really need us to choose based on what we want, not what she thinks we should want. David Rivera's work is beautiful, Michael agreed. I think we should stick with our decision. Even if it means disappointing your mother? She'll understand eventually. Once she sees David's photos of our wedding, she'll realize we made the right choice. Michael was optimistic about his mother's ability to accept our decision gracefully, but I was less confident. Patricia had a pattern of holding grudges when people didn't follow her advice, especially when she felt her expertise was being dismissed. I suspected she would find some way to express her displeasure about our photographer choice, but I hoped she would keep any negative feelings to herself during our actual wedding celebration. The months leading up to our wedding were marked by Patricia's continued passive-aggressive comments about our vendor choices. She would mention Robert Grant's recent successes photographing other local weddings. She would share stories about couples who had regretted choosing unfamiliar vendors over established local professionals. She would make subtle digs about the risks of hiring people from out of town who might not understand local traditions and expectations. I just hope this David Rivera person shows up on time, she said during our final planning meeting. Out-of-town vendors sometimes have trouble finding venues they're not familiar with. David has been very professional in all our communications, I replied. He's confirmed all the details multiple times. Confirmation is one thing, but execution is another. I've seen too many weddings disrupted by vendor no-shows. Is there something specific you're concerned about? Just the general unreliability of working with people who don't have established reputations in our community. Patricia's warnings felt more like hopes than genuine concerns. I got the impression she would be pleased if something went wrong with David's services, because it would validate her original recommendation of Robert Grant. 2 weeks before our wedding, I called David to confirm all the final details and ensure there were no last-minute confusion about timing or locations. Everything looks perfect on my end, David said during our conversation. I have your ceremony at 4 p.m. at the country club, followed by cocktail hour and reception at the historic mansion starting at 6 p.m. That's exactly right. Do you have the addresses for both venues? Yes. I have the country club address that your mother-in-law provided, and you gave me the mansion address directly. My mother-in-law provided the country club address? She called about a week ago saying she was helping coordinate vendor information and wanted to confirm I had the correct ceremony location. This surprised me because Patricia had never mentioned calling our vendors directly. I assumed she was just being helpful by double-checking details, though it felt slightly intrusive for her to contact David without mentioning it to me first. Did she provide any other information or make any changes to the plans? No, she just confirmed the country club address and the 4 p.m. start time. She seemed very organized and detail-oriented. That sounds sounds like Patricia. Thank you for confirming everything. I'm looking forward to photographing your wedding. It's going to be a beautiful celebration. The conversation reassured me that all the details were properly coordinated and that David was prepared to capture our special day exactly as we had planned. Our wedding day dawned bright and clear, with perfect weather for both the outdoor ceremony and the garden reception we had planned. I spent the morning getting ready with my bridesmaids, feeling excited and nervous about the celebration ahead. Patricia had been surprisingly supportive during the final week, helping with last-minute coordination and expressing enthusiasm about the various elements we had planned. Everything is going to be absolutely perfect, she told me while I was getting my hair done. You've planned such a beautiful celebration, and I know Michael is thrilled about marrying you today. Her warmth and encouragement felt genuine, and I was grateful that any previous tension about vendor choices seemed to have been set aside for our wedding day. At 3:30 p.m., our wedding party gathered at the country club to prepare for the 4 p.m. ceremony. The flowers had arrived on schedule and looked stunning. The catering staff was setting up for the cocktail reception that would follow the ceremony. Everything was proceeding smoothly according to our carefully planned timeline. At 3:45 p.m., I began to feel anxious about not seeing David or his equipment anywhere around the ceremony site. Most wedding photographers arrive early to scout locations and set up their gear before the ceremony begins. Has anyone seen our photographer? I asked my maid of honor. I haven't seen him yet, but maybe he's setting up in a different area. Could you check with the country club staff to see if he's checked in? A few minutes later, my maid of honor returned with concerning news. The staff says no photographer has arrived or checked in today. My stomach dropped as I realized something was seriously wrong. I called David's phone number, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted him asking about his location and status, but received no immediate response. Maybe he's just running late, Michael suggested, though he looked worried too. His phone might be off while he's driving. The ceremony is supposed to start in 10 minutes. Even if he's just late, he's going to miss the processional in the beginning of the ceremony. We decided to delay the ceremony by 15 minutes, hoping David would arrive and explain whatever had caused his delay. Patricia was circulating among the guests, explaining that we were having a small delay with vendor coordination, but that everything would begin shortly. These things happen with weddings, I heard her telling guests. There's always some little mix-up that needs to be sorted out. At 4:20 p.m., with no word from David and growing anxiety among our guests, we made the difficult decision to proceed with the ceremony without our professional photographer. Several family members had cameras and phones, so we asked them to take as many photos as possible during the ceremony. I'm so sorry about this, Patricia told me as we prepared to begin the ceremony without David. I can't imagine what could have gone wrong. He seemed so professional when I spoke with him. Did he say anything that might explain where he is now? Nothing that would suggest any problems. This is very strange and disappointing. Patricia's sympathy felt genuine, and I appreciated her support during what was becoming a stressful situation. The ceremony itself was beautiful despite the photographer's absence. Michael and I exchanged vows in front of our family and friends, and the country club staff did an excellent job managing the logistics. But I felt a constant underlying sadness knowing that the most important moments of our wedding day were being captured only by amateur photographers with phone cameras. After the ceremony, we continued trying to reach David while preparing to move to the historic mansion for our reception. Finally, at 5:30 p.m., David called back. I am so incredibly sorry, he said, sounding genuinely distraught. I've been driving around lost for the past 2 hours trying to find your ceremony venue. Lost? But you said you had the country club address. I have an address, but it's not leading me to any country club. I've been to 3 different locations, and none of them are the right venue. What address do you have? David read me an address that was similar to the country club's actual address, but with a different street number that corresponded to a residential neighborhood about 20 miles away. That's not the right address, I told him. Where did you get that information? Your mother-in-law provided it when she called to confirm the venue details. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. Patricia had deliberately given David incorrect address information, causing him to spend our entire ceremony driving around lost instead of photographing our wedding. The correct address is... I gave David the proper information, though by now it was too late for him to capture any of the ceremony or most of the cocktail hour. I can be there in 30 minutes to photograph the reception, David offered. I feel terrible about missing your ceremony. I've never had anything like this happen before. Please come photograph what's left of our celebration. And David, this wasn't your fault. David arrived at the historic mansion just as dinner was being served, managing to capture some photos of the reception, dancing, and cake cutting. But the most important moments, the processional, the exchange of vows, the first kiss as husband and wife, existed only in blurry phone photos taken by well-meaning relatives. I'm so sorry this happened, Patricia told me during the reception. I can't believe there was such a mix-up with the address information. It's not a mix-up, I replied, still processing what I had learned from David. Someone gave him the wrong address deliberately. What do you mean deliberately? Who would do such a thing? I don't know, but David said you called him to confirm the venue address, and the address you gave him was wrong. Patricia looked shocked and confused. I don't remember giving him a specific address. I thought I was just confirming that he had the right venue name. He said you provided an address that was 20 miles away from the actual country club. I must have made an error when I was looking up the information. I feel terrible if my mistake caused this problem. Patricia's explanation sounded plausible, and I wanted to believe that the photographer disaster was the result of an honest mistake rather than deliberate sabotage. But something about her reaction felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was bothering me about her response. The rest of our wedding reception was beautiful, but the missing ceremony photos cast a shadow over the entire celebration. Every time someone mentioned the photographer situation, I felt a fresh wave of disappointment about the memories we had lost. Michael and I tried to focus on the positive aspects of our wedding day. We were married to each other, surrounded by family and friends, and beginning our life together as husband and wife. But both of us felt sad about not having professional documentation of one of the most important days of our lives. Maybe we can do a recreation photo session sometime, Michael suggested during our honeymoon. David could photograph us in our wedding clothes at the same venues. It wouldn't be the same as having photos of the actual ceremony, I replied. But it might be better than having no professional photos at all. We did arrange a post-wedding photo session with David a few months later, which produced some beautiful images of us in our wedding attire at both venues. But those photos, while lovely, couldn't capture the authentic emotion and spontaneous moments of our actual wedding day. For 5 years, the missing wedding photos remained a source of sadness and regret for both Michael and me. We would look at other couples' wedding albums and feel envious of their professional documentation. We would scroll through our phone photos from our wedding day and wish we had better quality images to preserve our memories. We would consider hiring photographers for anniversary celebrations, but it always felt like we were trying to recreate something that had been lost rather than creating new memories. Patricia was sympathetic about our disappointment, occasionally mentioning how terrible she felt about the mix-up that had caused David to miss our ceremony. She would suggest photographers for our anniversary celebrations, or recommend ways to display the phone photos we did have from our wedding day. Her continued remorse seemed genuine, conversation, and I gradually stopped thinking about the incident as anything other than an unfortunate mistake that had damaged our wedding memories. But Patricia had been carrying a secret about our wedding day that would eventually come to light in the most unexpected way. The revelation came during Michael's 32nd birthday party, which we hosted at our house for family and close friends. Patricia had been drinking wine throughout the evening, more than I had ever seen her consume at any previous family gathering. She seemed relaxed and talkative, sharing stories about Michael's childhood and embarrassing anecdotes about his teenage years. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, Patricia lingered in our Kit Rivera, while I cleaned dishes and put away leftover food. Michael was outside saying goodbye to the last few guests, leaving Patricia and me alone in the house. "You know," Patricia said, her words slightly slurred from the wine, "I never told you how sorry I am about your wedding photos. Patricia, you've apologized many times. It was an honest mistake." "Was it though?" she asked, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What do you mean? I mean, was it really a mistake? Or was I just angry that you wouldn't listen to my advice about Robert Grant?" My heart started racing as I realized what Patricia might be about to reveal. "Patricia, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe I gave your photographer the wrong address on purpose because I was tired of being ignored during your wedding planning." I set down the plate I was washing and turned to face Patricia directly. "You gave David the wrong address on purpose? I wanted you to see what happens when you don't trust the advice of people who know better than you do." "Patricia, you deliberately sabotaged our wedding photos?" "I sabotaged your stubborn insistence on hiring some unknown photographer instead of using Robert Grant like any sensible bride would do." The casual way Patricia admitted to destroying our wedding memories while blaming me for not following her preferences was breathtaking. "You made David miss our entire ceremony because you were angry about our photographer choice? I made you learn a lesson about respecting the wisdom of people with more experience than you have. The lesson you taught me was that I can't trust you with important information about events that matter to me. The lesson I tried to teach you was that mothers-in-law usually know what they're talking about when it comes to wedding planning." Patricia's twisted logic was stunning. She had sabotaged our wedding to prove that she was right about vendor choices, and she somehow felt justified in having done so. "Patricia, do you understand that you destroyed irreplaceable memories of our wedding day? I understand that you could have avoided all of this by choosing Robert Grant in the first place. So you think Michael and I deserve to lose our wedding photos because we didn't follow your recommendations? I think you deserve to learn that your choices have consequences, especially when those choices ignore good advice." Patricia was doubling down on her justification, rather than showing any genuine remorse for what she had done. "You watched us be sad about our missing wedding photos for 5 years, knowing that you were responsible. I watched you deal with the consequences of your own stubborn decision-making. Our stubborn decision to choose a photographer whose work we loved. Your stubborn decision to prioritize your own preferences over the wisdom of people who care about you." The conversation was surreal. Patricia was admitting to deliberately sabotaging our wedding, while simultaneously arguing that we had deserved the sabotage. Michael walked into the Kit Rivera, just as Patricia was explaining her philosophy about teaching lessons to ungrateful daughters-in-law. "Mom, what are you talking about?" he asked, clearly sensing the tension in the room. "I'm explaining to your wife why her wedding photos went missing," Patricia replied matter-of-factly. "What do you mean explaining why they went missing?" "David got lost because of an address mix-up. David got lost because I gave him the wrong address on purpose." Michael stared at his mother in disbelief. "You gave him the wrong address on purpose?" "I gave him an address that would teach both of you a lesson about ignoring my wedding planning advice." "Mom, you sabotaged our wedding photos." "I sabotaged your wife's insistence on making poor vendor choices despite my superior knowledge and experience." Michael looked stunned and hurt as he processed what his mother had just admitted. "Why would you do something like that?" "Because neither of you would listen to me about anything related to your wedding planning, and I wanted you to see what happens when you ignore good advice. So you decided to punish us by making sure we didn't have professional photos of our wedding ceremony? I decided to let you experience the natural consequences of your poor decision-making." "The natural consequences? Mom, you created those consequences by lying to our photographer." Patricia was unmoved by Michael's obvious distress about her revelation. "If you had chosen Robert Grant like any reasonable couple would have done, none of this would have happened. If you had given David the correct address like any decent person would have done, none of this would have happened. If you had respected my expertise and experience, I wouldn't have needed to take corrective action." The term corrective action to describe deliberately sabotaging our wedding photos was particularly offensive. Patricia genuinely seemed to believe that her sabotage had been a justified response to our failure to follow her preferences. "Mom, I can't believe you've been lying about this for 5 years while watching us be sad about our missing wedding photos." "I haven't been lying. I've been waiting for you to learn from your mistakes and acknowledge that I was right about the photographer situation. You were right that we should have chosen a photographer who would show up to our wedding, but only because you made sure our chosen photographer wouldn't be able to find our ceremony. I was right that established local photographers are more reliable than unknown out-of-town vendors. David was completely reliable. He spent 2 hours driving around looking for our wedding because you deliberately misdirected him. He was unreliable because he didn't double-check the address information or arrive early enough to account for potential navigation issues." Patricia was determined to find ways to blame David, Michael, and me for the consequences of her own deliberate sabotage. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Patricia defending her actions and Michael and me trying to process the magnitude of her betrayal. Eventually, Patricia seemed to realize that her confession had not been received as well as she had apparently expected. "I should probably head home," she said, gathering her purse and jacket. "This conversation has gotten a bit heated, and we're all tired. Mom, we need to talk about this more. You can't just admit to sabotaging our wedding and then leave. We can discuss it when everyone has had time to calm down and think about things more rationally." "Rationally? You deliberately destroyed our wedding photos and hid it from us for 5 years. What's rational about that? What's rational is learning to accept advice from people who have your best interests at heart." Patricia left our house that evening without apologizing or showing any genuine remorse for what she had done. Michael and I stayed up until nearly 3 a.m. talking about his mother's confession and trying to process the implications of what we had learned. "I can't believe she's been lying about this for 5 years," Michael said repeatedly. "And I can't believe she still thinks she was justified in doing it. She watched us be sad about our wedding photos, knowing she had caused that sadness, and she felt no guilt about it. She felt no guilt because she convinced herself that we deserved to lose our photos for not following her advice. How do I maintain a relationship with my mother after learning something like this? I don't know. How do you trust someone who would sabotage something so important to prove a point about their superior judgment?" Michael was devastated by his mother's revelation, not just because of what she had done, but because of how she had justified it to herself. The Patricia he thought he knew was someone who might disagree with our choices, but would never deliberately harm our wedding day. The Patricia who had been revealed was someone who felt entitled to punish us for not deferring to her preferences, even if that punishment meant destroying irreplaceable memories. Over the following days, Michael and I had to decide how to handle our relationship with Patricia going going forward. She had shown no genuine remorse for her actions, no understanding of why sabotaging our wedding photos was wrong, and no commitment to avoiding similar behavior in the future. She continued to frame her sabotage as a justified response to our stubbornness, rather than as a cruel betrayal of trust. Maybe she'll feel differently once she sobers up and has time to think about what she admitted, Michael said hopefully. Maybe she'll realize how much she hurt us and apologize properly. But when Patricia called the next day, she seemed more concerned about managing the social consequences of her confession than about addressing the harm she had caused. I hope you two won't make a big deal about our conversation last night, she said. I was tired and emotional, and maybe I said some things that came out wrong. You admitted to deliberately sabotaging our wedding photos, I replied. What part of that came out wrong? I think the wine made me express my frustrations in a more blunt way than I normally would. So you're saying you didn't actually give David the wrong address on purpose? I'm saying that maybe my motivations were more complicated than I made them sound last night. Patricia was trying to walk back her confession without actually denying what she had done. She wanted us to treat her admission as drunken rambling rather than as the truth about her deliberate sabotage. Patricia, you told us very clearly that you gave David the wrong address on purpose to teach us a lesson about ignoring your advice. I told you that I was frustrated about feeling ignored during your wedding planning process. You told us that you sabotaged our photographer to make us experience consequences for not choosing Robert Grant. I told you that I wished you had made different choices about your wedding vendors. Patricia was gaslighting us about her own confession, trying to make us question what we had heard her say. But Michael and I both remembered her words clearly, and we both understood that her admission had been genuine, even if she now regretted making it. Mom, you can't take back what you told us, Michael said during a phone call later that week. We know that you deliberately gave David the wrong address, and we know that you've been lying about it for 5 years. I think you're misremembering some of what I said because emotions were running high. We're not misremembering anything. You admitted to sabotaging our wedding photos because you were angry about our photographer choice. I admitted to feeling frustrated about being excluded from your wedding planning decisions. You admitted to taking corrective action by giving our photographer incorrect venue information. I admitted to making some mistakes during a very stressful time in all of our lives. Patricia's refusal to acknowledge what she had actually said made it impossible to have a productive conversation about moving forward. She wanted us to accept her revised version of events while ignoring the clear confession she had made. Michael and I decided to limit our contact with Patricia until she was willing to take genuine responsibility for what she had done. We stopped including her in family celebrations and holiday gatherings. We stopped sharing details about our lives and future plans. We maintained polite but distant communication when necessary, but we no longer treated her as a trusted family member. Patricia responded to our withdrawal by portraying herself as the victim of our unreasonable anger about ancient history. She told extended family members that we were holding a grudge about old wedding planning disagreements. She complained to her friends about ungrateful children who couldn't appreciate everything she had done for them over the years. She never mentioned her confession about sabotaging our wedding photos, instead framing our conflict as an overreaction to minor tensions during our wedding planning process. Some family members believed Patricia's version of events and encouraged Michael to reconcile with his mother. Others suspected there was more to the story than Patricia was sharing, but didn't want to get involved in family drama. Michael was caught between his love for his mother and his recognition that she had betrayed us in a fundamental way. I keep hoping she'll realize how wrong she was and apologize sincerely, he told me during one of our many conversations about the situation. But she seems more invested in justifying her actions than in repairing our relationship. She's not going to apologize because she doesn't think she did anything wrong. How can she not think that sabotaging our wedding photos was wrong? Because in her mind, we forced her to take corrective action by not following her advice. That's insane logic. It's the logic of someone who can't accept that other people have the right to make different choices, even when those choices don't affect her directly. Michael gradually came to accept that his mother was unlikely to ever acknowledge the full extent of her wrongdoing, or show genuine remorse for her actions. Patricia had revealed something fundamental about her character. Her need to be right and in control was more important to her than our happiness or our trust. She was willing to destroy irreplaceable memories to prove a point about her superior judgment, and she felt justified in having done so. 3 years after Patricia's confession, Michael and I renewed our vows on our 8th wedding anniversary. We hired David Rivera to photograph the ceremony, which took place at the same historic mansion where we had held our original reception. This time, David arrived early, took beautiful photos of every moment, and provided us with the professional wedding photography we had always wanted. The vow renewal was smaller and more intimate than our original wedding, but it felt deeply meaningful to finally have proper documentation of our commitment to each other. I'm so glad we did this, Michael said while looking through David's photos from our vow renewal. These are the wedding photos we should have had 8 years ago. They're different from what we would have had originally, but they're still beautiful memories of our love for each other. Do you think we should send copies to my mother? That's up to you, but I doubt she'd want to see photos taken by the photographer she tried to sabotage. Michael decided not to share our vow renewal photos with Patricia, recognizing that they would likely remind her of her own sabotage rather than celebrate our renewed commitment. Patricia continued to maintain minimal contact with us, sending birthday and holiday cards but not being included in important family celebrations or milestones. She never asked about our vow renewal ceremony or expressed interest in repairing our relationship. She seemed content to maintain the fiction that we were overreacting to old disagreements rather than responding appropriately to her deliberate betrayal. Michael eventually made peace with having a distant relationship with his mother, understanding that maintaining boundaries was necessary for protecting our marriage and our emotional well-being. I love my mother, but I can't trust her, he explained to family members who encouraged reconciliation. She showed me that her need to be right is more important than my happiness, and I have to protect my family from that kind of destructive behavior. Some extended family members understood and respected Michael's decision. Others continued to pressure him to forgive and forget, arguing that family relationships should transcend individual conflicts. But Michael and I had learned that maintaining toxic family relationships for the sake of peace often requires accepting unacceptable behavior. Patricia had shown us who she really was when her preferences were challenged, and we chose to believe her actions rather than her excuses. 10 years after our wedding, Patricia developed health problems that required more family support and involvement. Michael struggled with how much help to provide given our strained relationship, and his lack of trust in her character. I want to be a good son, he told me during one of our discussions about Patricia's declining health, but I also don't want to pretend that what she did to us was acceptable or forgivable. You can help her with practical needs without rebuilding a close emotional relationship. It feels complicated to provide support for someone who sabotaged our wedding and never apologized. It is complicated. You're allowed to have boundaries even when someone is sick. Michael ultimately decided to help coordinate Patricia's medical care and ensure she had necessary support, but he maintained emotional distance and limited limited personal interaction. He felt comfortable providing practical assistance while protecting himself from further manipulation or betrayal. Patricia never acknowledged her sabotage of our wedding photos, even during her final years when she might have felt motivated to clear the air about past conflicts. She took her secret to her grave, along with any potential remorse about the damage she had caused to our relationship. At Patricia's funeral, several people commented on how sad it was that Michael and I had become estranged from her during her later years. They expressed hope that we could find peace with whatever disagreements had come between us. Michael gave a respectful eulogy that focused on Patricia's positive qualities and contributions to their community, without mentioning the personal conflicts that had defined our relationship with her. I loved my mother, but I also had to protect my family from her destructive impulses, he told me after the funeral. I'm sad that she never felt motivated to repair our relationship, but I don't regret maintaining boundaries with someone who could sabotage our wedding and feel justified in having done so. Looking back on the entire experience now, I understand that Patricia's sabotage of our wedding photos was a gift in disguise. It revealed her true character and priorities before we had children or made other major life decisions that could have been affected by her manipulative behavior. Her willingness to destroy our wedding memories to prove a point about her superior judgment showed us exactly how she would handle future disagreements. She taught us that she valued being right more than our happiness, control more than our autonomy, and her own preferences more than our special occasions. Those lessons, while painful, protected us from decades of additional manipulation and interference. We learned to set boundaries, maintain distance, and prioritize our own judgment over the opinions of people who claim to know better. Most importantly, we learned that some betrayals are so fundamental that they change the nature of relationships permanently. Patricia's sabotage wasn't just about wedding photos. It was about her belief that she had the right to punish us for making choices she disapproved of. That belief system was incompatible with having a healthy relationship with us, regardless of her other positive qualities or our shared family history. The wedding photos we lost were irreplaceable, but the knowledge we gained about Patricia's character was invaluable. She showed us who she really was, and we chose to believe her.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop your favorite part in the comments. See you in the next one.